evening, folks. This is your Factivist Report for Sunday, the 30th of April. We're going to close out the month with a bang. We're going to talk about the mainstream media's coverage of the latest anti-woke fad and the trap that they are falling into by lending legitimacy to this nonsense, and their piss-poor coverage of transgender issues, most of which is based on conjecture and not fact, which is a problem if you're a newspaper, quite frankly. So we're going to turn this over to Dave.
There's a couple of things I want to say before I get into this. First off, we're going to be talking a little bit about anti-woke. Let's just be honest. And by the way, before I get into it, I forgot. I apologize for my dark screen. If I turn on the light, it's going to be too bright. But
I'm not inspired by Doc Brandon last night at the Correspondence Dinner.
Exactly.
Frankly, yeah.
I'm in the dark, but I'm not really in the dark, if you know what I mean. So let's get that out of the way. So anybody, I completely get it. I understand it. I need to work on my my graphics, my video. I know, guys, I'm working on it.
You're going to be looking at screen sharing most of the video, so don't worry.
That's the only reason I don't have a dark screen, is because we're screen sharing.
Right.
So first off, let's just be completely honest about anti-woke. Anti-woke is a pro-me movement. It's selfish, selfish, selfish. What about me? What about me? What about me? That's why the right wing can cater so well to people, because of our selfish nature. Most of what these news stories cover, when you are interviewing these people, what do you think? Me, 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 me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
All I can hear every time I hear these people interviewed is the Beatles song "I Me Mine" playing in the background, because that's exactly what that song is about. You know, it's a made-up problem, wokeism. It really is. You know, at one time it was considered virtuous to have compassion and understanding and love your neighbors. Now it's, you know, rugged individualism. It's all about me. Let's buy a gun. You know, that's really where we are in America. It really is. And by the way, it was another mass shooting today.
Right.
Okay.
Was that the Texas one or something
else? No, there's a new one.
There's a new.
Yeah, I haven't posted it yet. There's a new one. And again, they'll send you thoughts and prayers, but they certainly won't send you any gun legislation, because that's being way too woke.
Right.
You know, so
it's not about helping your fellow man, you know, making them feel better. It's about, oh my God, these people are making me feel uncomfortable.
Right. And by the way, we have a new GOP candidate that entered the race.
Oh, yeah.
I can't even remember his name, but he's basically running on the anti-woke platform, because that's really all the GOP has to run on. Honestly.
He's from India. He's the Marianne Williamson version of the GOP candidate.
Right.
So
he won.
We're not even going to say his name, because first off, we don't remember it, because he doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But here, you know, as we're saying, it's me, me, me.
And this is how far it's gone. It's becoming a platform for a political party. It's a platform. It's a platform for DeSantis. It's a platform for Trump. It's a platform for the GOP. And the newspapers are falling into it. Some of them, not all of them. In fact, not most of them, but at least one that I never expected would.
Which is the New York Times.
Which is the New York Times.
The second thing is that kind of falls right in line with the whole me, 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 is this focus on medical celebrities. And I see an eerie similarity between this anti-trans medical doctor celebrity thing and
Movement. Call it a
movement,
movement.
movement, and the anti-vax movement with Andrew Wakefield. You're seeing some people come to the forefront. Okay. Just be warned. It's happening. And who's pushing them forward? Now, Andrew Wakefield, back in the day, he was promoted by network news. Okay. And then once it was exposed, the bottom fell out.
Right.
Now, the New York Times is promoting some of this, and they're getting backlash from their own reporters, as well as the Human Rights Campaign and GLAAD. Now, the bottom hasn't fell out yet, but let's see how far this has to go. So let's get into this.
And we encourage you, as we have done today, to drop your subscription to the New York Times.
Right.
Because I have dropped mine as of today. I have other sources I can go to. I will not give them my hard-earned money to promote irresponsible journalism.
I told Deb I'm gonna do that. I can't do it right this second, but I'm going to do it once this presentation is over, to be completely honest with you.
Well, I'm paid up for whatever I'm paid,
Right.
for whatever I'm paid up for. I canceled through PayPal. So
Right. And I'm going to do the same thing.
yeah.
So The Guardian, I just want to make this point again. This is a trap. The war on wokeness. Okay. Now they get into it, the whole thing with DeSantis and this trumping up of basically made up issues like CRT and Black Lives Matter is violent, all that stuff. Okay. Yeah. Protect my kids instead of trans kids, stop woke, anti-choice. Don't indoctrinate my kids with your ban books. All of this is coming from anti-woke.
The latest book to be banned, by the way, is a picture book about Betty White. I'm not kidding.
I know.
Pretty much Judy Blume. Absurd, really. I just can't even.
Right. So the point being that anti-woke is extremely high profile now. So whether you're pro or anti, if you see a story that hits a woke, quote unquote, woke topic or anti-woke topic, it will generate a lot of buzz. And it's popular right now to do these things. And you have to remember that newspapers, they're here not only to inform you, but to make money. So if it's going to get them clicks, they're going to talk about it. The reason I bring up the New York Times history is because I want to make this point. They've been around since 1851. They're not known for being Fox News. They're not known for the loud, bombastic people or whatever. They're not known for making noise. But right this second, they're promoting that in some ways. One of the writers who wrote one of the stories that was in question helped break the Weinstein story, and she won awards for it. So I'm not saying that there aren't good writers in the New York Times, but I'm saying that there's movement towards a disturbing trend in the New York Times. This is a story from NPR by Mary Young, February of this year. New York Times stories on trans Jews slammed by writers, including some of its own. And we're not talking about a couple of guys. 200 New York Times contributors signed an open letter. Okay. I have the open letter and I'm going to read some of it. So this was February 15th, I think. Yeah, February 15th. This is basically a stream of correspondence. So I'm going to start. I believe this is, yep, this is the initial letter. So this is addressed to Philip Corbett, who is the associate managing editor for standards at the New York Times. Dear Philip, we write you as a collective of New York Times contributors with serious concerns about editorial bias in the newspaper's reporting on transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people. And before I go on, Deb, can you kind of explain the difference between transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming?
So transgender are it's like my child who is transitioning from male to female, literally changing gender. Uncomfortable since very early in life. You could see that. I could see that even as a child, as my child was growing up. Never said a word, never encouraged anything, just let it kind of play itself out, but was aware that this child was not like every other boy that I have ever watched grow up, including my own nephews and the children he played with. Non-binary are people who identify with both genders, as the best way to describe it. Don't identify strictly as females, don't identify strictly as males, may never take any medication. But this is where you get the terms he, they, the pronouns,
right,
kind of thing. Gender non-conforming, I'm not sure that how much different that is than.
I was just curious. I never even.
I just don't want to say anything stupid.
Right.
Because I don't want to be like the New York Times.
Right.
I don't know anything. Yeah. I know a lot because I'm living that life,
Right. But I had never even heard the term.
So look, this is gender non-conforming, the definition.
Okay.
Denoting or relating to a person whose behavior or appearance does not conform to prevailing cultural and social expectations about what is appropriate to the agenda. Well, so you could call me that. Honestly, I hate dresses. I'm a female. I don't feel as though I want to transition to a male, but I hate dresses. I don't wear dresses. I haven't worn a dress since I was 5 years old. And I managed to live in the corporate world quite happily for 25 years doing so. So, that's just someone whose appearance does not fit the mold, basically. And there are a lot of those people. I am a lesbian, and I don't hide that. I never have. So,
right.
That's basically the scenario.
So I'm going to read a couple more of these paragraphs because I want to set the tone for this whole thing. And one of the articles that is mentioned in the second paragraph, I'm going to talk a little bit about. So plenty of the reporters, actually 3 more paragraphs. Plenty of reporters at the Times cover transgender issues fairly. Their work is eclipsed however, by what one journalist has calculated as over 15,000 words of front-page Times coverage debating the propriety of medical care for transgender children published in the last 8 months alone. The newspaper's editorial guidelines demand that reporters preserve a professional detachment, free of any whiff of bias when cultivating their sources, remaining sensitive that personal relationships with news sources can erode into favoritism in fact or appearance. So I have heard some of this in other, during other stories. I kind of heard it in Spotlight, where you have to be detached from the story. However, this completely disintegrates when the New York Times starts talking about opinion pieces. Same thing with the Wall Street Journal, actually. And they hide behind this whole opinion piece sometimes. So the Times has in recent years treated gender diversity with an eerily familiar mix of pseudoscience and euphemistic charged language while publishing reporting on trans children that omits relevant information about its sources. And again, sounds eerily familiar when
Like
we
the
were talking
anti-vax
about.
movement.
Yep. For example, and I have the story here, I actually missed that whole bit. I know they were talking about retracting it. I don't know if they did. I didn't see this in the version that I read. For example, Emily Bazelon's article over the battle over gender therapy uncritically used the term patient zero to refer to a transgender child seeking gender affirming care, basically the first transgender care that they knew of seeking gender affirming care, a phrase that vilifies transness as a disease to be feared. And I
Let me
would
put
go,
this into context.
yeah, saying it's a virus.
Patient zero was the term referred to in during the AIDS epidemic, when they were trying to find the very first source of the spread of AIDS with a map. That's how you track a disease. You find out its orientation or its origin. And that's the way they would do it. They were looking for patient zero to figure out who he had connections with. So in case you think, by the way, that virus tracking is new with COVID, it is not. It is part of trying to nail down where a disease comes from. But to use the term patient zero, literally, the first thing that came into my mind when I read that was, that's like AIDS. Why would they ever be doing that to somebody talking about transgenders? It's
Right.
ridiculous. It's absolutely unacceptable, in my opinion. Patient zero gives me goosebumps. It gave me goosebumps when I read the book by Randy Schultz, and it gave me goosebumps when I saw the movie. When I followed the entire AIDS epidemic throughout the 70s and 80s.
I took it a different way. I took it as, it makes it sound like the kid is the disease.
Yeah. Well,
so actually,
it's the first child is the person who started this fad. They now want to present transgender as a fad. It isn't. If there are more people transitioning, it's because more people are talking about it. More people, up until the time that the GOP went into the woke scenario, it was being more accepted in society. Right. It's certainly more accepted in my state.
And also, one of the things I'm going to give homework, boys and girls. One of the Wall Street Journals talks about transgenderism just being girls being tomboys. No.
Oh, please.
No. Let's not go there. I mean, we'll go there to tell them they're full of crap. But so here's another story which started this whole thing with Deb. She gave it to me. She's like, Dave, take a look at this thing. In a similar case, Katie Baker's recent feature, When Students Change Gender Identity and Parents Don't Know, misframed the battle over children's rights to safely transition. The piece fails to make clear that the court cases brought by parents who want schools to out their trans children are part of a legal strategy pursued by anti-trans trans hate groups. These groups have identified trans people as an external threat to society. Okay, and we're going to talk about one of the groups and someone who is a lawyer for one of those groups being hired by the New York Times to write for them. So let's move on. So after all of this happened, we have letters being written, and this goes on, by the way. That was just February. This goes on to as recently as April 6th. Okay, so this is read this whole thing. You'll get, we're getting into union fights at the New York Times. We're getting into a lot of stuff. Not only that, but protests from thousands of people through GLAAD and through the Human Rights Campaign. So what's the response by the New York Times? This is an article by Charlotte Klein. This is February 27th. So this is about 2 weeks after the initial thing hit. Top editors, Pulitzer-winning reporters, contributors, and the paper's union have been embroiled in a back and forth over journalistic independence and quote-unquote activism. As one staffer said, we really haven't progressed as a newsroom to meet this moment. So this is the first paragraph basically describes Carolyn Ryan, who is the Times managing editor, saying this: we don't do our work in an effort to please organizations, governments, presidents, activist groups, ideological groups, she said in a recording of the meeting obtained by Vanity Fair, noting that this has been a bedrock principle of ours for generations, and many of us feel in our bones, but can get really obscured in the modern media landscape, which these days have populated with so many more partisan players. She basically outed herself as being one of the partisan players,
Right.
by not listening to one of the sides in this movement. As a journalist, and by the way, Deb and I do not claim to be journalists, but we know this much. As a journalist, you have to be objective and show as many points of view as humanly possible, as well as present facts. And what it sounds to me is happening is that managing editors at the New York Times are digging their heels in and saying, we're right, we're right, we're right. Which has caused a union fight.
I'd like to also say something else, because I did study journalism for a period of time. I did not end up going into journalism. I ended up going into advertising instead. But don't ask me why, but
I think I know why.
No, whatever. But
it's too goddamn stressful for one thing. To make people slamming
One
doors.
thing I also want to say is, when you're a journalist and you're interviewing someone and you ask them a question and their response is, I'm not a fan. Well, shouldn't you then go on and ask the person, well, can you qualify that statement? What makes you not a fan? What facts do you have behind that statement? You know, is that a gut feel? Should you be operating on gut feel when you're talking about medical care? You know, you don't just let that fucking slide and publish it and then call yourself journalistically independent.
Right.
Okay. You know, I'm sorry, but to me, there are just basic principles that you follow, and you can do whatever you want to cover up for not following those, but you know, it doesn't work.
So this basically says that when journalists wrote this letter, they were reprimanded, and they had a right to collectively air their concerns.
Absolutely.
and the union is backing them up. Now, some people within the union said that these people shouldn't have done it. It doesn't matter. Trust me, as a union rep, that doesn't matter. What you think doesn't matter. You have to defend these people.
Why shouldn't they have done it? It's their working environment.
Because it affects the union negatively and all that nonsense. That's nonsense. Okay.
Right.
They are trying to better the
They're actually doing it because they care about the New York Times.
Right.
They care about what happens when the Times, because they work for that newspaper.
Correct.
And they wanted to maintain its credibility.
Right. This is how far this has gone. Join 100 plus organizations and leaders calling on the New York Times to improve their coverage of transgender people. There's a call. Okay.
Now there is, this is what they will refer to as woke when you do something like this. But you know what? When you have a group of people who are just trying to live their lives, why should this actually, quite frankly, be a discussion point for anybody in the nation?
Right.
It's medical care. It's none of your damn business. We all know there are risks associated with breast augmentation too, but we don't have people talking about that day in and day out.
Right. So we also have the Human Rights Campaign talking. There are reasons why this is an issue. The one thing that I want to make perfectly clear is that right-wing outlets, right-wing politicians are using these articles as weapons to promote legislation.
They are.
Okay, including the Arkansas Attorney General, who used one of these articles as a cudgel. So, see if I can find it. There we go. And I'll go back in a minute. So, direct impact, negative impacts of Times coverage for trans people and their families and medical providers include. And I'm going to go over a couple of these. I'm not going to really read them, but I'm going to kind of nutshell them. The state of Texas quoted Emily Bazelon's June 22nd report to further target families of trans youth in court documents over their private evidence-based healthcare decisions. So that was the Patient Zero article. The Arkansas Attorney General cited 3 Times articles in her amicus brief. Amicus briefs are being made. Those are legal documents to create legislation and lawsuits supporting
to criminalize doctors and parents
for ensuring trans youth can access necessary medical care. Now, you talk about parental rights all the time. This Alabama law is criminalizing parents exercising their right to get medical care for their kids. Okay, I always say this goes both ways. You want parents to know whether they're being abusive to their kid or not being empathetic or being negative towards their kid and causing stress to their kid. But you don't want to help a parent help their kid. This is not about parental rights, never has been, by the way. So here are 3 articles, including the piece that they talked about, another January 22nd piece, and an April 22nd piece. So just last week in a Nebraska legislative hearing, the Times reporting on trans youth and its reputation as the paper of record was used to justify a bill that would criminalize healthcare for trans youth. So here are a couple of things that these organizations that people are asking for in a coalition letter. Okay, and I'll show that. That's the New York Times sign-on letter that I had showed you before. Stop printing biased anti-trans stories. Now, you can present anecdotal evidence if you have research-based evidence to back it up. None of these stories, I saw none of these stories really have that. This issue has been popping up. More and more kids have been identifying as non-binary and transgender than ever before, and it's becoming a new issue. People are in the process of studying it, and it takes time to gather data, which is part of the problem. A lot of these articles are talking about opinion. One of these stories focused almost solely on the opinions of heterosexual parents confused about their kid identifying as transgender. And not being okay with it, basically.
And if they're confused, there are plenty of places you can go to become unconfused.
Right. Okay. Listen to transgender people, hold a meeting with transgender community leaders within 2 months.
And you know what? That's important because you know what? Here we have a bunch of people constantly talking about transgender people, but never talking to transgender people and letting them speak for themselves. We have politicians speaking for transgender people. We have pseudoscientific doctors speaking for transgender people, but we don't have transgender people involved in the discussion. And how is that okay? That is not okay. Getting it from the horse's mouth is what you actually should be doing.
Deb and I have talked about this, and because of personal experience, I was very uncomfortable as a younger person being around gay people, transgender people. And I don't, Deb and I have been friends for about 5 years, and we talk to each other, we communicate with one another, and we share each other's points of view, and we listen to one another. Dear God in heaven, so if that happens in a genuine way, problems can be solved, and better writing will come out of it. More balanced writing, less biased writing, and less writing based on these experts or celebrity doctors. Hire at least 4 transgender writers and editors within 3 months. Now, there might be a caveat to that, because you don't want people like Caitlyn Jenner. There's a doctor who happens to be transgender, who seems to be anti-trans, is in this whole parental rights thing, which we'll talk about. So you got to be careful with that, but you want people sympathetic to pro-transgender points of view.
You're already giving a voice to those people. You're giving a voice to those anti-trans people. Why wouldn't you want to give a voice the other way? It makes no sense to me. If you are a reputable newspaper, that's what you are doing. Okay? If you're the Epic Times, you don't have to do that.
Right.
Okay?
So here is the story, the one that they mentioned about the patient zero. Just look at the title. The battle over gender therapy. More teenagers than ever are seeking transitions. True. but the medical community that treats them is deeply divided about why and what to do to help them. The medical community, the organizations they're not.
They're not legit. The legitimate medical community
They're
are not divided over this.
They're not.
There's a divide between the legitimate medical community and the pseudoscientific, politically driven anti-trans people.
There is one person that quit her position, and we'll get to her. She's mentioned in this article, and there were doctors throughout this article who vehemently disagreed with. Actually, there was a Bowers, and there was the person that we're going to be talking about for a minute. So this is an Associated Press article about guidelines that were set about transgender treatment for young teenagers, lowering its recommended minimum age for starting transgender transition treatment, including hormones and surgeries. So the World Professional Association for Transgender Health said hormones could be started at age 14. Before it was 16. Some surgeries can be done at 15 or 17, a year or so earlier than previous. The group acknowledged potential risk, but said it is unethical and harmful to withhold early treatment. Okay. I have to read this next paragraph. The association provided that the Associated Press with an advanced copy of its update ahead of publication in a medical journal expected later this year. Sorry, my voice is going. The international group promotes evidence-based standards of care and includes more than 3,000 doctors, social scientists, and others involved in transgender health issues. So,
and then look on the latest news.
Right.
Indiana, Idaho governors stand ban on gender affirming care. Kansas bans transgender athletes from women's and girls' sports. All of that is harmful. That's the shit that's harmful right there.
The update is based on expert opinion and review of scientific evidence on the benefits and harms of transgender medical treatment in teens whose gender identity doesn't match the sex they were assigned at birth, the group said. Such evidence is limited, but has grown in the last decade. It takes time. With studies suggesting the treatments can improve psychological well-being and reduce suicidal behavior, which has, if you read more and more from the Human Rights Campaign and other organizations, GLAAD, suicide rates among transgender are very high. And we talked about that last week, actually. So let's move down and talk for just one moment about psychologist Erica Anderson. She's a doctor I was talking about. She is transgender. She did make her transition later in life. She resigned her post as a board member of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health last year after voicing concerns about sloppy treatment given to kids without adequate counseling. Now, every time I hear an answer from her, she uses emotional language. She doesn't use facts or figures. And she uses anecdotes. So just keep that in mind. And she
let me just say this.
Estimates.
Right. Let me just say this. she's still a member and supports the updated guidelines, right?
Right.
And then she gets down to this, they tell me horror
There you
stories.
go.
They tell me our child had 20 minutes with the doctor before being offered hormones. The parents leave with their hair on fire. Okay, so let me talk to you about my experience, okay? And let me just say this, okay? We all know there are, just like everything in life, there are good doctors, there are bad doctors, right? If you are uncomfortable with the first doctor you talk to, you find another doctor, you find another provider. My experience at the facility where my child is undergoing transition was that they sat with us for over an hour discussing it. They questioned my child in front of me. They showed us documentation about what the effects of the hormones could be on your body. One of which is osteoporosis, development of osteoporosis, not necessarily at a young age, but maybe at an older age. They really can't nail that down. They were very clear about the fact that many of these things have not yet been studied. And they haven't been studied largely because they don't want to give them any money to study it with.
Right.
That's, quite frankly, it's a political decision. But the fact of the matter is that they were very upfront about everything. I have a wad of paper that's about this thick that I walked away from after discussing it with them. So to say, yes, there are some places that are sloppy, that's probably true.
Now, here's
But
my
that's
question.
true of an allergy doctor or a
Right.
heart doctor. You can find, bad actors in almost every medical profession. Then you just go somewhere else if you're uncomfortable.
So I've seen articles about this particular doctor saying that she's seen thousands of families. But who are they? How many families have relayed this? What are the details? How many doctors did these families try to go to before they went to her? Any of that?
Isn't
It's
that
very,
kinda
very
just
vague.
isn't that kind of just like the statements about, the anti-vax movement with the movie Vaxxed?
Yep.
All of these families that offered their personal opinions about how their loved ones died. Again, it's the same principle. How do we know she's seen thousands of families? Because she said it.
Right. So they give some a little bit of data in the AP article. There's another person, Marcy Bowers, who's another doctor. So those are two that are talking about this and talking about not allowing parents to be more involved in their kid. Okay, we're talking about two. This is the article that they were talking about the sloppy treatment. So top trans doctors blow the whistle on sloppy care, and it took a minute for me to go down. So I hope that that's it. No, it's not. So, and it was Maria Schreier, I believe it was. So let me see. Oh, there we go. Anderson agreed that we're more likely to see more regret among teenage girl population in regards to transitioning.
Really? And where did she get that? It is my considered opinion that due to some of the, let's see how to say it, what word to choose, due to some of the, I'll call it just sloppy healthcare work, they're going to have more young adults who will regret having gone through this process. Well, you know what? Actually, the recidivism rate is very low. Okay, there is not a lot of regret among the transgender community, no matter what she is saying here. And that has been reiterated time and time again. Would we have some people who regret doing it? I know people who regret doing a lot of things that have been elective surgeries. I do. Okay. But I don't feel as though, certainly my child hasn't been rushed into doing any of that. My child started this transition process at 17 and is now 22 and is just now considering surgery. In 5 years of doing research online, she's doing her own. And she's working with the doctors at her facility to identify the right doctor for her to do the surgery. So please, folks, understand that this is like being greatly exaggerated. And this is where the bother comes in for me.
So, and it's going to earn me a lot of criticism from some colleagues, but given what I see, and I'm sorry, but it's my actual experience as a psychologist treating gender variant youth, which she shows nothing. And I'm not asking for her to violate HIPAA, but show some kind of data. I'm not asking for names. I'm not asking for just data, something.
She's pre-blowing the whistle because she's worried about decisions being made that will result in regret. So it's like preemptive panic is
Right.
what it is. It's preemptive panic. It's creating it's creating an issue that doesn't exist.
So again, and I feel like I'm doing a Whitney Webb reading again. What exactly was sloppy about the healthcare work? Rushing people through the medicalization, as you and others have cautioned, and abject failure to evaluate the mental health of someone historically in current time and to prepare them for making such a life-changing decision. Okay, so here are my questions for this person. What is the recommended time that should be spent? What is your data supporting that recommendation? What is your data that supports that doctors are rushing? What is the process of rushing? What are the things that they do? You know, we're just talking about Anderson. Maybe I'll talk about Bowers later, but here's the story that Deb and I just started this whole thing with. When students change gender identity and parents don't know. The big story about the mother, Jessica Bradshaw, with her 15-year-old identified as transgender at school, and the parents didn't know about it. Instead of asking why their child was worried about telling them and talking to their child, they went to the press and complained that the school should have told them because they felt betrayed. Again, me. I'm not saying that they shouldn't, feel something or angry, but, and I can't tell parents what to feel, but it just reeks of anti-wokeism to me.
Right.
Am I wrong?
No.
So didn't the school need her permission, or at least to tell her? Okay. To tell the mother
Right.
that our daughter was our son. This person was asking to be called by different pronouns. Okay. The Bradshaws have been startled to find themselves at odds with the school over their right to know about and weigh in on a major development in their child's life, a dispute that illustrates how school districts, which have long been a battleground in cultural conflicts over gender and sexuality, are now facing wrenching new tensions. So we have tensions, we have anxiety, we have feelings. Okay. The Bradshaws accepted their teenager's new gender identity, rather, but not without trepidation, especially after he asked for hormones. Now, please, let me reiterate: the child just asked to be called by a certain pronoun. They didn't ask for medical treatment from the school. Okay. They didn't ask for medical advice from the school. They were just asking about pronouns.
Is there a problem with that? I don't understand that problem. I guess I don't understand that problem. I don't want to be called Debbie. You call me Deb. I mean, what do you want me to tell you? See, the other thing is here, there is another factor here that no one ever speaks about. Because I'm, reading while you're talking. A national survey found that of transgender people seeking healthcare, 33% of respondents reported having at least one negative experience with a healthcare provider in the past year related to being transgender, including verbal harassment, refusal of treatment, or having to teach the healthcare provider about transgender people to receive appropriate care. No one talks about that. No one. I haven't seen one magazine article, not one newspaper article relevant to that conversation.
So the other thing is the negative reactions by parents, which this article glosses over. They mention it, but they don't go into detail. They focus on the parents.
Right. It is not always safe to come out in your own home, even as gay. Okay. It is not. It is not. And it is not certainly not safe to come out in your own home as transgender all the time. You cannot trust your parents with that. If a child knows when he can trust his or her parents with that, just by freaking living with them for that long.
So the student of Ms. Bradshaw, now 16, told the New York Times that his school had provided him with a space to be himself that he otherwise lacked. He tried to come out to his parents before, he said, but they didn't take it seriously, which is why he asked his school for support. Please hear that. He tried to come out to his parents before. They didn't take it seriously. So why didn't they already know anyway? Why would the school have to tell them if the kid already did?
They blew him off is what the problem is. Oh, you'll outgrow it. You'll get over it. And that's what parents do sometimes.
Right. I wish schools didn't have to hide it from parents or do it without parental permission, but it can be important, he said. Schools are just trying to do what's best to keep students safe and comfortable. When you're trans, you feel like you're in danger all the time. Even though my parents were accepting, I was still scared, and that's why the school didn't tell them.
So, let me just...
Why the story?
Let me just relate a funny story of my own personal thing, just because it's so freaking funny. I look at back, I'm 69 now. I'm looking back on this as it being funny. But when I was young, my freaking mother knew something was up. Okay.
Right.
She went snooping around in my bureau and found a bunch of love letters from my friend down the street who was female. And I don't know how old I was. I don't know how old I was, but I remember my mother going into this fit of pique over what have I done to create this, right?
Right.
I just remember me looking at my mother and saying, you know what, Ma, don't worry about it. It's just a phase I'm going through. I'll get over it. And that just shut her up. It was
Right.
I didn't feel in danger in my home. I just didn't want to listen to her drama, quite frankly, And I love my mother. We got along great. And later on in life, I came out, and she, what she said to me? Well, I knew that. So, gee, Ma,
Right.
It's just sometimes you don't want to hear it and you can deal with it. And sometimes you genuinely have reason to be afraid in your home.
So this is a picture of the 16-year-old kid flipping through his homework. I'm disappointed, but I trust she, the mother, wants the best for me. He said of his mother, who doesn't want him to get through to go get medical treatment yet. So they're at least having the conversation.
Right.
But this idea that the school has to be this facilitator, when the child tried to talk to the parents, didn't, and the parents kind of blew them off, you're getting them involved. And here's something that I want to explain to you too. So part of this whole issue is that the writers or the staff inside the New York Times that are upset are saying that these writers who are writing these pieces are tone deaf to some of this and make it political and maybe don't even realize they're parroting the parental rights argument from right-wing groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom. Okay. And in response, what do the New York Times staff managing editors do? They're very proud to announce that David French joins the Times as an opinion columnist. So David French is a lawyer for the Alliance for Defending Freedom.
Yeah, nice move.
Writing about politics and current affairs in the era of Donald Trump often requires a variety of traits that do not always or even go together. Factual and intellectual clarity, moral seriousness, and a spirit of generosity towards others and humility towards oneself.
You got to be shitting me. Never mind. Don't even start me.
Happily for the Times opinion staff, those traits are embodied by an exceptional degree by David French, who is joining us as our newest columnist beginning January 13th. We are delighted to welcome him. Oh, by the way, he wrote for the National Review.
Okay, I can't.
So, all right. The Alliance Defending Freedom, and here's an article talking about, parents being notified by schools. The Alliance Defending Freedom, labeled by the Southern Poverty Law Center as a hate group because founded by some 30 leaders of the Christian right, the Alliance Defending Freedom is a legal advocacy and training group that has supported the recriminalization of sexual acts between consenting LGBTQ adults in the United States and criminalization abroad, and has defended state-sanctioned sterilization of trans people abroad. Mic drop. I'm not going to read anymore.
Oh, I will. Has contended that LGBTQ people are more likely to engage in pedophilia. That is a long-standing trope. That is bullshit.
Sorry.
Claims that a homosexual agenda will destroy Christianity and society.
Right.
Go away, okay?
And they gave the lawyer for this group a forum. You want to do that, then you get the most rabid, pro-transgender person that you possibly can to counteract that.
This group spreads misinformation.
It's misinformation. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't see the Times as being credible anymore at this point. Not on this topic anyway. Maybe the recipe section is okay.
Megan Twohey is a reporter and a column or a writer, that investigative reporter that broke the Harvey Weinstein story. But this story so the World Professional Association for Transgender Health and the United States Professional Association for Transgender Health questioned some of the reporting in this article because of some of the sources that they used. Okay. They're talking about bone density. I'm not going to get into the whole issue with bone density, but the point being that you only used one or two sources for people that were not that proficient in the field, that only maybe wrote one article, that this one guy who, Dr. Sundeep Khosla, is an adult endocrinologist who does not work clinically with transgender youth, only has a single publication on transgender health. Publication isn't a research study, but a brief review commentary on the issue of bone density in adult transgender people. So what does that have to do with teenagers? Okay. Anecdote provided of an adolescent who began and then stopped pubertal suppression due to bone density loss lacks important details, including age, pubertal stage at initiation of puberty blockers, length of time on blockers, baseline bone density. They're talking about where is your data? Okay.
Yep.
So, after all of this is the most recent thing that the New York Times has done. They put out a student opinion poll. What is your reaction to the recent wave of anti-transgender legislation? Again, they focus on the anti-transgender legislation as ask for opinion, not providing data that counteracts this, which there is plenty. We haven't done that either, but our point is they haven't, which is why you shouldn't be reading them in the first place.
Which, to begin with, quite frankly, let me explain something to you. Part of their bullshit writing has been used to create this legislation. So
Right.
why aren't they asking the questions about the subject of their writing, not about anti-transgender legislation? Why aren't they talking about where the criticism is coming for them?
And by the way,
They don't want to talk about that. That's why.
Dr. Anderson, and I guess I forgot to put that in, Dr. Anderson, that individual, the reason I focus on her and not Bowers is because Dr. Anderson took the time and the effort to write an amicus brief for a lawsuit against a Maryland school.
Right.
This has adverse effects for these people, for these teenagers. Now, you say, well, that's just one issue. I'm not going to go into it, but Tom Cotton, send in the troops. The nation must restore order. The military stands ready. Now, the
This is
New York
about Black Lives Matter.
This is about Black Lives Matter.
Send in the troops.
Yeah.
We didn't send in the troops on January 6th, did we?
The New York,
No.
and by the way, this is June 3rd, 2020. So you
Right.
can't say, oh, this January 6th didn't happen yet. Yes, it did.
Did anybody ask Senator Cotton, where were the troops on January 6th, 2021?
Not in this article.
Not that I didn't think so. No.
But well, hey, it's opinion.
Yeah.
No.
Let me give you my opinion, Tom.
Right, exactly.
You know what I
But-
call him anyway? Tom Cottonmouth Snake. That's what he is.
So the Times reporters went crazy. A lot of readers went crazy. So here is the response from the New York Times.
They're off the edge.
Editor's note, June 5th, 2020. After publication, this essay met strong criticism from many readers and many Times colleagues, prompting editors to review the piece and the editing process. Based on that review, we have concluded that the essay fell short of our standards. Okay.
Oh, shit, Sherlock.
And should not have been published.
Oh, ooh,
Look, if this happens once every couple of years, it's a problem, but it can be managed. This is happening more and more now. So the basic arguments advanced by Senator Cotton, however objectionable people may find them, represent a newsworthy part of the current debate. Really, why?
no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
They're lending credence to what the man is saying. They're saying it's newsworthy because it's him that's saying it. They're lending credence to right-wing extremist, violent, fascist politicians.
You know, when when the people were walking through the college campus during the Unite the Right Valley, no one called the, with blazing torches, no one called the military out on them, did they? No,
Nope.
they didn't. And you know what? This is bullshit. This whole thing is bullshit right here.
You would be very happy to know that Senator Cotton and his staffs cooperated fully in their editing process.
Oh, really? Good. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, great. I trust him
So,
like I trust a freaking viper.
we have followed the New York Times. We've given them the flowers when they deserved it, but this needs to stop, and we need to stop them. And by stopping them, I mean we need to. After this,
Unsubscribe.
I'm unsubscribing. I'm done.
I already did, and I'm boycotting. We need to not buy. Nobody needs to buy. I'm sorry. There are times when you do stuff that's necessary. You know, I have other things I can read. I don't need the New York Times under these conditions.
These people are these doctors, Bowers, Anderson, and some of the people that I'm going to talk about in a minute in your homework, are becoming celebrities off of the backs and the pain of people who are suffering and anxiety driven. I mentioned someone last week they're searching for a place to go because their kid is in transition and they can't get medication for them because they were in Oklahoma. All right.
Which, by the way, has also banned transgender care for adults. Understand that, okay?
So, and can I just say, as a straight person, to have someone who is transgender speaking against the needs of a kid who's feeling anxiety ridden to begin with, to potentially put them in a dangerous situation or even add stress to them, rushing them to address stuff with their kid or with their parent rather. I'm sorry, that's unconscionable. I mean, I'm sure Deb can talk about when she talked to her child initially about it. And again, Deb's very open. She's gay. I mean, I'm sure there was anxiety and tension there too. So
my kid was very worried about.
Yeah,
was very worried about telling me, but I really do think, if I remember correctly, the school knew before I did. And I said to, and I have no problem with that, to be honest with you. And I spoke, my child's also autistic, very high functioning, but, and I spoke to counselors all throughout her education on a monthly basis or weekly basis sometimes. And they never revealed anything to me. And I had absolutely no problem with that. But when my child was worried, I turned around and said, 2 lesbians had you. How do you think I'm going to react to that? What are you worried about? I mean, you know, and all she did was just breathe a sigh of relief. Oh, thank God. I said, yeah, you don't have to worry about anything here. I got it.
But my point is, if a child is that worried telling their gay parent, I could just imagine
Exactly.
a transgender kid telling their straight parent.
Exactly. Now, my child at the time was hanging around with a bunch of boys who were just horrifying, actually, for her.
Right.
And she was terrified and was very happy to get away from that. Yeah.
So Deb,
I actually think she was probably more worried about her other mother finding out because we had an ugly
right.
divorce. So,
Right. So the presentation on New York Times is basically done. Would you like to stop this and then I'll add the homework because it's over
Yeah, do the
an
homework.
hour.
Let's do it.
We'll do the homework then. Wall Street Journal is our next
Target.
examination and target. And here's why.
Yeah.
I'm just showing the stories. Take a look at the authors. Take a look at their background. Take a look at what they do. Okay. Every tomboy is tagged transgender. The terminological change behind the push to treat sex role nonconformity with surgery or hormones.
That's absolutely bullshit.
I agree. By Colin Wright. Take a look at Colin Wright. I'll go into Colin Wright. Next one. The American Academies of Pediatrics Dubious Transgender Science. I took a look at Julia Mason, and I also took a look at Leo Sapir. All right. And also take a look, and I talked about this before, the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, of which Julia Mason is actually part of.
They're
Now,
not actually a society for evidence-based gender medicine.
No, they are not. There's someone that I have found, and this is a pretty good source, but she has asked for copyright reasons not to share her information via the internet. All I'm going to do is show the link, and I'm going to show the front page. Not going to show any of the information, but I'm going to show the front page so you know what it looks like. It's called the Transgender Map by Andrea James. And there's different parts of this. Now, it's how there's a lot of information as to how to plan for funding for your medical care, where to go, different organizations, state by state, all that kind of stuff. But there's also information on misinformation specialists, the politics of it, all of that. And what I asked you to do, and I'm even going to give you the links to those because it's kind of, in the beginning, it's hard to navigate this, to be completely honest with you. So I gave in the sources all the links. All right. I don't want to hear any of that. I can't find it, blah, blah, blah. Leo Sapir, Dr. Anderson, the Society for Gender-Based, blah, blah, blah. You put anybody in there, most of the people you're going to find, if they have anything to do with transgender issues, Mulvaney's probably in there. The transgender actress who did that beer commercial, she's probably in there somewhere. So it's a pretty good resource, I do have to say, and I will respect her wishes. We might even, who knows, we might ask her if we can show her information, because it's pretty good actually. But guys, don't just take things by face value either. I remember speaking with someone back a few years ago who had a child who was autistic, and she was told that she made her child autistic through vaccines. So she was really, truly freaking out and didn't know what to do because she was pregnant. She didn't know if she could vaccinate her other kid, blah, 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 blah. And she was part of the anti-vax movement for a while. And then all of a sudden, she realized that Andrew Wakefield was a fraud. And this was the whole Andrew Wakefield thing. So I don't, if anything, I want parents or people looking for information not to fall into the same trap all over again and fall into the science of celebrities, because there are some quote unquote celebrities out there. That guy who wrote the Tomboy article, he has a Patreon, he has a blog, all that stuff. I'll give away some of that. And it's so phony looking, it's not even funny. Go ahead, search for it. I'll give it to you next week. But
You know what? We give you information every week. We don't ask you to fund it.
No, we don't.
You know, we don't have a Patreon. You know, we don't charge you for premier content. It's like, you know,
And by the way,
we're out there to try to help.
right. By the way, before you guys, because Deb did throw some figures out there, and a lot of facts and figures are there, and the Human Rights Campaign, there and all that. I didn't go through all that because it would have made this about a 3-hour video.
What we're saying is you need to read.
You need to read.
Forget the memes. Put them away.
And when you look at content like that letter from the transgender organization to the New York Times, they put some data in there and they put some scientific processes in there. Even if they didn't like throw out facts and figures, they're like, what about this? What about that? Why didn't you look at this? Why didn't you look at that? They're not saying they're wrong. They're just saying you didn't go through the process yet.
Right.
And what are you doing? You're an investigatory organization. You know better. So when you're looking for information and you see a bunch of, well, I feel that people are going to feel this and that. By the way, my quote in ProPublica was exactly that people felt anxious and didn't feel comfortable coming to work because they didn't know who was sick with COVID. That was okay at the time because no data had come. I wasn't trying to tell people what to do. I was just giving
generating information that was factual. They were
factual at the time,
right?
To try to garner a little bit of change and to actually get my workplace to give that information so people would feel comfortable, and that's what they did.
Right.
So for you guys who were going to say, well, you guys didn't give any facts and figures, we don't have to. We're not journalists. And for you to think that that's a cop-out, the facts and figures are there. We've already read them. My point here is the New York Times, for whatever reason, I don't know exactly when, some of these articles are going back as far as 2019. So, I don't know exactly when it happened, but we're starting to really notice it now.
Yeah.
They're really starting to fall into this catering to a new customer base.
Right.
Make them lose their current one.
Right.
Okay. They really want to go that route. You don't have to read them if they don't have real information, if they're not providing real data to you. And by the way, same thing goes for the feeders as well. I don't know where we're going to get our information. If the AP is doing okay, I see the problem that I see with AP and Reuters is they're starting to rely too much on polls now.
Yeah, that's
a mistake.
Yep. All right, gang. We are done for this week. I know it's longer than what we have been doing, but you know what? Some things require that you split it up and watch it in two parts, whatever.
And Deb and I originally were going to read these articles to you. First off, we're not going to spoon VJ anymore. It's too much damn work, and we're tired already. But the second thing is you guys have to read these. You're going to make up your own mind one way or another. But we see red flags all over the place now.
Yeah,
so,
because we're in the middle of fascism right here.
And
there is no sugarcoating any of this now.
We are in the middle of a wave of anti-transgender legislation. And by the way, anti-pro-choice, anti-choice, anti a lot of things.
And this isn't about protecting anybody, okay? So
no,
get a clue.
Anyway,
later.
Thanks, guys.